Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back after our extended holidays. We are a bit behind now after the disruptions on campus, so that is why I drafted for us a schedule so that we know how are we going to catch up with the time that we've lost. There, I've also posted this on Vutela, so you can access it there. Today we will be dealing with Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is about quantitative research methods. Then tomorrow everybody still needs to attend. I know it is graduation week, but unfortunately we don't have any other choice because we have assignments that are due as well. So unfortunately I am going to require you to attend the whole group tomorrow as well as Thursday. Tomorrow we'll do Chapter 9. Yes, and then on Thursday, Chapter 10. It's only for an hour to 2 hours each day, so I believe that you will manage. And all in this venue, okay? So all today, tomorrow, and Thursday in this venue. Then next week, we will start with the literature review. On the 18th and 19th, we will provide you with your feedback on your assignments from your mentors. We will distribute it in class and discuss the feedback. And we will also do practicals in terms of your surveys, measuring instruments. And then on the 24th, we will discuss assignment 1, assignment 2 actually. That should be assignment 2, the rubric for that assignment, the proposal. And then on the 25th and 26th, we'll have some consultation in the offices, not a physical class, but consultation and finalization of assignment 2 so that you can submit on the 2nd of May, assignment 2. So we've already done, assignment 2 is about the proposal. Can you remember that? The research proposal. So the proposal consists of the plan for your research. Can you remember that? I took you through a template of what is contained in a research proposal. And that is the proposal that must be submitted on the 2nd of May. And therefore, this week, we are going to go through much of the theory for that specific assignment. Okay, so what have we done already? We've already done our topic selections and our titles. We have done our problem statements and our objectives and our research questions. That was assignment number 1. That information goes like it is. After you've done your corrections from your supervisor, which you will get on the 18th and 19th of April, then you will just do the corrections and copy it into your proposal. All right. And then the rest of the proposal consists of a short literature review, which we're going to get to still. And it also consists of your methods, the methods that you are using for your research. In other words, quantitative or qualitative research. Which sampling methods are you using? Which measuring instruments are you using? How are you analyzing the data? How are you gathering the data? All those things will come into the proposal. So we are done with also the qualitative research. That's one part of the methodology, okay? Not everybody is going to do qualitative research. What is qualitative research again? Prof. Dix did a lecture on qualitative research before the recess. Can you remember that? What is qualitative research? It's very important for you to understand the difference between qualitative research methods and quantitative research methods. Today we are going to look at quantitative research methods, but before we start, I need to know that you understand what is qualitative research. Who can tell me? Qualitative research. Anyone? Who's going to follow a qualitative approach in their research? Mba? I think you are, yes. Why?
Because my research has to do with perceptions of people, and I can't get it through the quantitative. I can only get it through a qualitative
Interviews. Yes, she's going to interview students, for example. It's to do with lesser numbers, small number. It gathers rich information. For example, something like perceptions. You cannot measure quite effectively necessarily with a quantitative survey. But with an interview, you can prompt someone to give you rich information. So you cannot conduct an interview on 500 respondents, okay? You can conduct an interview with 10 people, for example. That's manageable, and that is a qualitative research method, okay? Qualitative research method is not necessarily representative of the larger population because you are dealing with a smaller number of people, okay? That is qualitative research. Today we are dealing with quantitative research. Now, quantitative research is quite the opposite of qualitative research. Quantitative research has to do with large numbers. When we do a questionnaire, we can distribute that questionnaire to 500, to 1,000, to 2,000 respondents, and they can fill that questionnaire in, and we can capture and analyze the data by means of statistical procedures. With qualitative data, we get themes. We identify themes in our data. So someone will be interviewed. You will ask them, what is your perception about VUT? That student will then answer. Another student will answer. 10 students will answer, okay? From those answers, you will be able to see a certain trend. Most of them said, most of the 10 respondents, for example, said that VUT offers quality courses to students. So, for example, that's just an example. So you can see a trend and you will form themes from that. With quantitative research, you have data, you have numbers, and you take that numbers and you process it by means of statistical software or by means of Excel sheets so that you can attach percentages and say 20% of these respondents were males and the rest, the 80%, they were females, for example. Okay, so quantitative, the emphasis is on larger numbers, and we can process and statistically analyze the data that we have gathered. Okay, is that clear, the difference? So you can either use qualitative or quantitative research. If I ask you, what is your research design? And that comes into your proposal. What is your research design? You must tell me, I have a qualitative, or you're not going to say I, you're going to say this study follows a qualitative approach, or this study follows a quantitative approach. So there is also the option that you can follow a mixed method approach. That is where you have both quantitative and qualitative methods that you use. Perceptions can be measured both qualitatively and quantitatively. Then you have a mixed method approach that you are using. On BTech level, we are not going to look at a mixed method approach, so don't write to me mixed method because that gets very complex. You're either going to follow a qualitative approach or a quantitative approach, and you need to explain that to me in your research proposal under the heading for research design. All right. So let's look at the theory in terms of quantitative research. Let's just look at the outcomes. What we need to understand after this chapter. We need to understand some basic concepts in quantitative research. You'll get to deal with concepts like a population, like sample, like unit, like validity, reliability, dependent variables, independent variables. Those are concepts that form part of your methodology. You need to understand, what am I talking about if I'm talking about a population? What am I talking about if I'm talking about a sample or a sampling method? So those are some basic terms that we are going to look at today. You need to be able to explain the differences between different data types. So we get different data types that we can use and that we can analyze. But we need to set our measuring instrument so that we can measure according to a specific data type. We're going to get to that. And then we're going to look at internal and external validity, but only briefly. So the definition then for quantitative research, it is a process that is systematic and objective. In its ways, it uses numerical data. As I've said, you work with numbers and you capture those numbers in statistical packages or in software so that you can analyze that from a selected subgroup or from a sample from your population that you work on. So if your respondents are students at VUT, you cannot let all students at VUT complete the questionnaire. You will select a sample and you will gather data from that specific sample, numerical data, to see what they think of VUT, or how many are female and how many are male, or how many is in this faculty or in this faculty or whatever. And quantitative research makes it possible for us to generalize our findings to the population that is being studied. So in other words, quantitative research is more likely to be representative of the larger population. So if we have a profile of students at VUT from a sample that we've selected, that profile can be representative of the larger population of students at VUT. Okay, we can generalize it more easily. It's not always the case, but oftentimes with quantitative research it is the case. Quantitative research or data collection focus on random sampling. What is random sampling? Random sampling is, for example, if I go through the class, I give her number 1, 2, 3, 4, but I only take every second person in the class to take part in my survey. I randomly select every second person. Number 2, number 4, number 6, number 8. That is random selection. So quantitative data is often based on a random selection process of respondents where we decide, I'm going to pick every third person from a list that I have. From my class list, I want to do a questionnaire on every third person. But we get statistical software that can also calculate for us the randomness. Should I pick every second one? Should I pick every third one? Should I pick every fourth one? How do I decide? We get software that can help us to decide that. Okay. But quantitative, what you need to know, if I tell you the word random, it might be every second person on a list. It might be every third person or every fourth person. That is a random selection. In order to do random selection, you need a list of people or respondents. If you do not have a list, you cannot do random selection. If you are going to a festival, for example, you do not have a list of respondents. You don't know who's going to attend that festival, so there's no list. We also call that list a sampling frame. We'll get to that. If there's no list, you cannot do the random selection. Okay? So then you cannot tell me that you randomly selected respondents. Random selection means every second person, every third person, or whatever the case might be. But me randomly approaching anyone at the festival, that is not random selection. Okay? So randomization or random selection is part of quantitative research, which also helps with the representativeness or the generalization of results. As it says, since one of the aims is to generalize the results to the larger population. As I've said before, quantitative data is analyzed by means of statistical tests to indicate significance. So what happens with data? If you have data, you want to now capture your data. You're going to capture it on Excel spreadsheets. That's part of analyzing or treatment. In your proposal, it's going to be called the treatment of your data. You're putting that data in an Excel spreadsheet, and then from that spreadsheet, you can calculate certain percentages. And from that spreadsheet, you can even take the data and you put it into a package, what we call SPSS, social packages for scientific package for social scientists, and that package calculates for you correlations. If I want to see if there's a correlation between gender and what they prefer in terms of products that they buy at a shop, I can make a correlation in terms of that based on the SPSS significance, what it indicates to me. But you don't have to worry about that because you're not going to do complex statistical analysis. Your treatment of your data is you're going to capture your data in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. From there, you're going to interpret it by means of graphs and charts. Okay, and that is what you're going to explain to me in your proposal when it comes to the treatment of the data. Quantitative data is also used to test hypotheses derived from theories. So it indicates to us if something is true, is present or is not present. It can indicate that to us. It can support a hypothesis or it can reject a hypothesis. So with hypotheses, we often also use then quantitative data. And the quantitative data's research purpose is to find relationships, correlations and relationships between variables, dependent variables and independent variables. We'll get to those concepts. So that is in brief what quantitative research is all about. So you are now busy preparing, I hope you are busy preparing your research proposal, because you have the template, so you can be busy with that, especially with the literature searches and writing some of the literature, right? Am I right? Are you busy? You're going to start next week, after graduations. Yeah. Okay, but don't forget about the research. You need to keep this in mind while you are graduating, eh? Okay, so you are busy preparing your research proposal. What comes into your research proposal? We've already mentioned that your research question is going to come into there. And that question is important because it determines the type of data that you will need. In order to answer that question, the type of design, the research design that you need, the methodology that you're going to use is determined by your research question and your research objectives. So you have done that. You've already drafted a research question, and then you have now to decide what's going to answer that question. What methods do I need to employ in order to answer that specific question? So you need to identify from your question what are the dependent and the independent variables. What does your question indicate to you? It indicates to you the variables that you are looking at. If you are looking at customer satisfaction at hotels, your variable is customer satisfaction. That is a variable that you will have. And you need to know, how do I measure? What does that thing, customer satisfaction, consist of? What are the different variables that it consists of? So you need to look at your research question now to understand what is your variables, because your variables determines your measuring instrument and your research design. Okay, like she's looking at perceptions. She's saying that perceptions is mostly qualitative, so that is determining her research design, qualitative. She must now further go and look at what are the things that I need to ask in order to gain a better understanding of perceptions, for example. You need to plan. In your proposal, you are planning. You are doing prior planning before your research can commence. You need to plan your methods of research. What are you going to do? What measuring instruments are you going to use in order to answer the question that you have at the beginning? So you need to plan before you can commence. And it's very important, this planning, because this planning will guide your process. If you've done the planning in your proposal, you will know in July I'm going out to this and this place. I'm going to have to target 50 respondents. I'm going to have them fill in a questionnaire for me, because that will all be explained in your research proposal. So you need to plan for what are you going to do. You need to tell me, the reader, what is it that you're going to do. I need to determine, is that what you are going to do? Is that going to answer your question? And is it feasible? Can you actually do it? Is it possible to do that? Okay. So that is where we are in the process of the proposal. The proposal is important for your planning. So let's look at some of the important concepts right throughout this year, and we've already talked about some of these concepts, but right throughout this subject, we are looking at these concepts that I'm going to show you all now. And you will hear me talking about sampling and sampling units and populations and validities and reliabilities. Those are important research concepts that you need to understand, because that is also what you need to explain in your proposal. I want to know, who is your sampling unit? Who's your population? Who's your sample? How did you ensure reliability? How did you ensure validity? So if I talk about these concepts, you need to understand what it is because you're going to have to explain it to me in your research proposal. So let's look at these concepts. Firstly, it's a sampling unit. Data have to be collected from some units. These units are called sampling units or units of analysis. For example, people. Who's the respondents to your questionnaire or who's the respondents to your interview? Is it people? Is it individuals? Is it students? Is it businesses? Is it households in the community maybe? Who is going to be your respondents? And that is the sampling unit, the unit of analysis, the unit that you are looking at to get the information from. Okay, so some of you will be targeting tourists, others will be targeting businesses, others will be targeting maybe families, households. It depends on your research question and what your topic is. Okay, if you're not sure what your sampling unit is, then you need to talk to your mentor as well to determine your sampling unit. But by looking at your question and your title, you should be able to determine your sampling unit. Will you be able to? If you think about your title? Okay. If you are not sure, you need to find out. Because in your proposal, you need to explain what is a sampling unit and for your study, who is the sampling unit, okay, or the unit of analysis. The population, you've heard me talking about this concept before, population. A research question is also linked then to the sampling units. And this group consisting of all the sampling units relevant to the research question is called the population. So that is the broader population. From that population, you select respondents. Okay? So if you are targeting tourism businesses in Gauteng, for example, your population is tourism businesses. That is the larger population, but you're only focusing on the units in Gauteng, in certain ones, depending on if you have a list and those things, if you can do randomization. So, examples, all learners in South Africa that are 18 years or older, that can be a population. All private companies in Gauteng with more than 50 employees, that can be a population. And all households in a metropolitan area of Johannesburg, that can also be a population. But you're not going to all the households, you're not going to all the companies in Joburg, not to all learners in South Africa. You select from them a sample. Okay, this is the entire population. You're looking at all learners in South Africa that are 18 years or older, but you cannot let each one of them fill in a questionnaire for you. That is impossible to do. That's the population. You select from that population a smaller, more feasible number of learners to do your research on. Okay, you cannot target all private companies in Gauteng with more than 50 employees. You will never get done, never be finished. Okay, so you need to sample from that. So that from which you sample, that is your population. Okay, and that is determined by your research question. Once again, see why the research question is so important, that it's specific, because otherwise you cannot get this type of information from there. Then we have a sample frame. So I've talked about a list of respondents. That list of respondents, that is called a sampling frame. If you have a list of all private companies in Gauteng that has more than 50 employees, then that is your sampling frame. Okay? And from that list you will select randomly every second or every third private company. Okay. You can only do randomization if you have a sampling frame. If you don't have a list, then you cannot do random selection of respondents. So the sampling frame, whenever you hear the word sampling frame, that refers to the list of possible respondents. As I've said, if you're going to a festival, for example, you don't have a list of all the visitors that will go to that festival. Then it means you don't have a sampling frame. And that's okay as well. Okay? So it also depends on the context in which you are doing your research. So this is a list of the units, in other words, the units of analysis or the sampling units, as we've said in the population, in which each unit is uniquely numbered or can be uniquely identified. So you can, on your sample frame, you can assign a number to each of the respondents on that sample frame. So that is the frame. Then we get a sample. A sample is a subset of the population consisting of a predetermined number, and that number is called the sample size of randomly selected sampling units from the population. So as I've said, you have your large population. That population consists of units of analysis, and you cannot target all the units in the population. You have to sample. That is a subset of respondents, okay? And that is attached. I'm going to tell my students, I tell them, I want 50 questionnaires. That is your sample size, okay, for the tourism students. I'm not sure how it works in the other departments, but you and your mentor, you have to discuss that, okay? But sampling size is also determined by other factors. What will be representative? How big is the population? We need to look at the size of the population. The bigger the population, the more likely it is that your sampling will also be bigger. The sample size will also be bigger, okay, because you have a bigger population. But there are formulas to calculate that. We're not going into that now. Just know in your specific proposal, you need to tell me how are you sampling and what is your sample size. The sampling methods, we're going to do it tomorrow. So, but remember, what is a sample? It's a smaller number from the population. And in the population, we have units of analysis. That is our respondents. Okay? Yes?
So, do you also sample the both methods, or is it just the quantitative? Is it both qualitative?
Qualitative also uses sampling, yes. Yeah, there's sampling for both, but the sampling methods can differ for the there's different methods, but we'll go through it tomorrow. Okay, so sampling is a smaller number from the larger population. So you're going to explain all of this to me. You need to tell me who is your sampling and how did you get to that sampling, and what is your size, your sampling size. So from your research question and your title, you also get your variables. What are the aspects that you are looking at to measure? The variables are measured in your survey or in your questionnaire. A variable is a measurement, or it can be an observation that are made on the units in the sample, and they are called the variables, since the values will potentially vary from unit to unit. For example, gender can be a variable. Do we need to look at gender perhaps in a survey if we want to understand certain trends? Do we need to look at age if we want to understand why certain people behave in a certain way? Those are variables that studies can look at by means of survey. So your topic will determine what are the variables that you need to look at. Okay. Within variables, we also get dependent and independent variables. A dependent variable is a variable whose outcome is hypothesized as depending on one or more independent variables. For example, a student's grade is dependent on his or her IQ as well as the time he or she spent studying. So there we can see the dependent variable is the student's grade. That grade is linked to his or her IQ and the time or the effort that the student puts into studying. Those are the independent variables. So we can see that grades are dependent on things like IQ and effort, for example. Okay, so those ones are independent. We can't say that IQ depends on a student's grade. The student grade does not make your IQ, okay? The IQ contributes to the grade. The time you spend on studying contributes to your grade. Your grade does not contribute to the amount of time that you study. It doesn't work the other way around. Can you see that? Okay, so those are the independent and dependent variables, and these variables need to be defined in your study. What are your dependent and independent variables that you need to look at in terms of measuring to get the answers to your questions? Then we have the concepts of reliability and validity in research. Reliability has to do with consistency or repeatability of a measure or an instrument or a questionnaire. In other words, if I do a questionnaire today on this group of students, today, 2 o'clock, I do a questionnaire on exactly this group of students. Next week, Tuesday, 2 o'clock, I take the same questionnaire and I do it again with this specific group of students. The results of those 2 questionnaires must be the same. If they are the same, it is high in reliability. If they are far away and not at all the same, it's low in reliability. Okay. So reliability is when we repeat our procedure or our methodology or our measuring instrument so that we can see it is reliable. It's producing the same results. It has high reliability. So high reliability is obtained when the measure will give the same results if the research is repeated on the same sample. So on the same group of people or on the same respondents. If we get the same results, then we know our measuring instrument has high reliability. So we want to know from the students, how did you ensure reliability of your questionnaire? Okay. Validity. Validity refers to a measure or an instrument, and an instrument is said to be valid if it measures what it is supposed to measure. So let's take again the concept of customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction consists of different variables or different aspects, and those aspects need to be measured in order to determine whether or not customers are satisfied. So in your measuring instrument, you need to identify which are the exact variables for measuring customer satisfaction. What should I look at? And that should be included in a questionnaire, and that ensures validity. If you measure what you actually set out to measure, if your variables is an accurate description of what you are trying to measure. Okay. Do you understand that? Validity. When you actually measure what you say you're going to measure. So this means you need to go and look, what are the constructs of customer satisfaction? How can we measure that? What did other researchers use to measure customer satisfaction, for example? And that comes into the questionnaire. Okay, so those are the concepts that we will be dealing with throughout the rest of the year, actually, and it's important for you to be able to discuss those concepts in your proposal as well, where it is applicable. Then we have data types. Data usually comes from a variety of sources and are captured on different scales of measurement. Some of these measurement scales include nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Not ratio, that's a spelling error. Ratio scales. So let's look at the types of data that you can collect from your respondents. And this is examples of what you can also use in your survey when you try to collect data. You can use a nominal scale. Nominal scales is where values are distinguished from each other simply by different names. It can consist of 2 or more classes or categories. For example, you can ask a person, indicate your gender. They must indicate male or female, and you give them the option. You don't leave it open. It's not an open question. You have categories, male or female. An account at a bank, current savings or a transmission. You can ask someone what account, the color of your car, indicate is it red, blue or green. Let me just show you an example. So on a survey, this is typically what you will see, indicate your gender. 1 represents male, 2 represents female. Okay, so this is typically what you will find in a survey. Sometimes, if you ask, for example, occupation, there are so many occupations, it's impossible for you to list all of those occupations, but you can list, say, about 10 of the occupations, and then the last one you can just say other, and then the person can write and specify what other occupation, besides the ones that have been mentioned, is he or she occupying. So when capturing the data as well, when it comes to a question like this, you're going to open your Excel spreadsheet. You're going to have a column for male and a column for female, and then you're going to no, you're going to have one column for gender, sorry, and then you're just going to type in 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, whatever the gender is. You're only going to work with that value, the 1 and the 2. Okay, but the column will be named gender. But we'll get to that when we have questionnaires. So that is a nominal scale where we have categories like that. Then we have ordinal scales. These are essentially the same as a nominal scale, except that the classes may be meaningfully arranged in an order and may include numeric data that have been grouped into classes. For example, the size of clothes. There's an order to that. Can you see it starts with small, medium, large? There's an order to that. Gender, male and female, there's no order to that. Okay? Level of agreement. You can ask someone, indicate the extent to which you agree with the following statement. Then they can say agree, neutral, or disagree. Can you see there's also a certain order here? Agree, neutral, and then so from positive to negative. And a person's level of education, where you order or ordin from grade 10, then grade 11, 12, 3 years, tertiary 4 years, or whatever. So there's a certain order. So the difference between nominal scales is where you have just plain different categories which the respondent can indicate. But with the ordinal scale, those categories are ordered according to size or from positive to negative, or so there's a certain order linked, or age or so. This can also be an ordinal scale. Indicate your most preferred to your least preferred subject. Then the respondent must indicate 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which one is the most preferred? Second, third, and fourth. So they put the order to the specific subject. That can also be an ordinal scale. Interval scales, data measured on this scale are numeric and therefore has quantity. It allows one to measure differences in quantity or magnitude. For example, if you measure temperature, the difference between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius is the same as the difference between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. So between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius, there is a 10 degrees Celsius difference. The difference between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius is also 10 degrees Celsius. So even though 30 degrees is much higher than 20 degrees, the difference between 30 and 40 is still the same as between 10 and 20, namely 10 degrees Celsius. So for temperature, one will use interval scales. I have not used this in social sciences though. Ratio scales, they have a true zero value. A value of 0 means that the attribute that is measured is not present and one is allowed to take ratio. With a ratio scale, it is possible to say how many times larger or smaller one object is in relation to another. For example, we use this with physical measurements like height, weight, and length. So how many times is one person longer than another person or heavier than another person? You can also measure how much older one person is than another with a ratio scale. Then what we often use also in social sciences is the Likert scale. This requires respondents to indicate their degree of agreement or disagreement, for example, with a variety of statements that are related to an attitude or an object. It is composed of two parts, the item and the evaluation. So I can ask you, indicate whether or not you agree with the following statement. Research is an interesting subject at tertiary level. And then you have to indicate to me, I strongly agree, I don't know, I'm neutral about it, I disagree, or I strongly disagree. And that is the evaluation. The evaluation consists of a 5. So the Likert scale can either be on 5 points or it can be on 7 points. Let me show. I think I have an example. There's an example, the statement. The establishment satisfy my needs. That is the statement. And then the respondent needs to indicate they strongly disagree, they disagree, neither disagree or agree, and strongly agree. So that is a 5-point Likert scale, not a 7-point. Can you see that? Yes. So we can also move that to a 7-point. Mostly we do use in our field of study the 5-point. Then we have the Semantic Differential Scale. It's also a 5 or a 7-point rating scale, but it uses adjectives that are polar opposites of each other. It measures meaning and connotations we ascribe to verbal and non-verbal symbols. Let me just show you an example. How would you describe the facilities of the Emerald Resort and Casino on the following scale? There you can see it's complete opposites. The closer you get to 1, the more clean the establishment is. The closer you get to 5, the more dirty the establishment is. Okay, so respondents can rate on a scale from 1 to 5. This size, 1 and 2, it's clean. 3 is in the middle. 4 and 5 is more to the dirty side. Okay, so that is semantic differential. So this can also be used, a type of data that can be gathered. Okay, so we are not scientists, hard scientists, pure scientists. We are social scientists. So we do not really make use of experimental design. So I do not want to go into detail about experimental designs in terms of research, but you need to know that experiments are part of quantitative research. And our pure scientists, those who do the lab work and so on, they do make use of experimental designs. So these designs have been developed to answer a specific kind of research question, namely the cause and effect question. So does a specific treatment have any effect on some dependent measure? So we've all seen those advertisements where you can participate in a medical study or something, and then you will be exposed to some kind of treatment to see if it can cure a specific illness that you have. And that is part of an experimental design. So you are exposed to something to see if your situation or your illness or something changes about you if you are exposed to that treatment. So there's a cause and effect. What is the effect of the treatment on the respondent? And that is experimental designs that can be used, but mostly in the hard sciences. And also part of experimental designs, they need to look very closely at internal and external validity, because this makes also the experiment trustworthy. Internal validity refers to an experiment that has high internal validity if there's sufficient control of variables other than the treatment. And external validity refers to the degree to which results can be generalized to the entire population. And then non-experimental designs, that is more where we come in. This is mainly used in descriptive studies, in which the units that have been selected to take part in the research are measured in all the relevant variables at a specific time, and no manipulation. So there's no treatment, or the respondent is not exposed to any kind of treatment to measure the cause and the effect. So this is for describing certain phenomena, for example, descriptive studies. And in this case, surveys are mostly used to obtain quantitative information that can be used to describe or explore certain research topics. And this is more where we will lie. When we do our quantitative research in the social sciences, we will make use of a survey type of design that is a non-experimental design. Okay, I think that is all I have. Okay, any questions with regards to this? Please check out the schedules. I will see you tomorrow again in this venue. 10 o'clock, yes, tomorrow at 10, this venue.